And it is a shameless way, in my view, to monetize them by reminding the world that they are royal. He got that title.
Yeah.
What was supposed to be Prince Harry's righteous march toward justice has suddenly begun to look far more like a slow-motion implosion. This week, the courtroom didn't merely hear legal arguments, it dropped a bombshell. And that bombshell didn't land on the Daily Mail. It landed squarely at Harry's feet. For years, Harry has framed this lawsuit as a moral crusade, a lonely prince standing up to a corrupt press, a traumatized son determined to dismantle an industry he claims destroyed his mother and poisoned his life. That has been the pitch. That has been the brand. And that is the story his most loyal supporters have repeated without question. But then came the disclosures, and suddenly, the story began to change.
And already creating headlines and undoubtedly headaches for the royals.
Because buried within court documents, emails, and testimony is a far darker picture, one that suggests intimidation, pressure, and threats were not peripheral to this case, but central to how it was built. Researchers allegedly leaned on witnesses. Money was dangled. Pressure was applied. Language emerged that sounded far less like truth-seeking and far more like say what we need you to say. And if even half of this is true, then this case is not about justice at all. It is about control. Let's be very clear. Harry did not walk into court waving a banner for press reform. He walked in flanked by some of the most notorious figures in tabloid history, people whose names are synonymous with phone hacking scandals, illegal surveillance, and journalistic misconduct at the highest levels. Convicted hackers, disgraced operatives, men who made fortunes violating privacy, now repackaged as champions of accountability.
Sussexes were going to take part in some kind of reality show, and at the time they issued an on-the-record denial saying they're not doing any reality shows.
But now, with emails referencing alleged threats, payments, and bullying tactics, this is no longer merely eyebrow-raising, it is explosive. And Prince Harry is furious. Sources close to the situation describe him as incandescent, blindsided, lashing out behind the scenes as the narrative he so carefully curated begins to slip through his fingers. Because the moment the public starts asking how this case was constructed, not just why, the entire story begins to wobble. This is no longer David versus Goliath. This is David showing up with Goliath's former mercenaries and insisting he is still the good guy. What makes this especially damaging is the hypocrisy. Harry has spent years lecturing the world about ethics, trauma, accountability, about how words are violence and power must be wielded responsibly. And yet here we are, reading about alleged threats issued to reluctant witnesses, pressure to raise their game, and financial incentives quietly floated to secure cooperation. That is not reform. That is coercion. And it completely obliterates the moral high ground Harry claims to occupy.
And then flew all the way back to California before it had even ended on Sunday. Right. Before the Queen hit the balcony, they were back on their gas-guzzling plane.
The irony is painful. The same man who says he wants to protect ordinary people from media abuse now appears linked, at least indirectly, to tactics that look disturbingly like bullying. The same man who claims to despise tabloid culture is allegedly relying on its worst veterans to win his case. The same man who preaches transparency now finds himself entangled in secrecy, shadowy arrangements, and questions he does not want answered. And this is where Harry snaps. Because for him, this case was never just legal. It was personal. It was symbolic. It was meant to validate everything he has said since walking away from the royal family. It was supposed to prove he was right all along, that the press is evil, that he is the victim, that his crusade is justified. Instead, it is exposing something else entirely, a pattern of behavior in which the ends always justify the means. And that pattern does not exist in isolation. It mirrors everything we have seen from Harry and Meghan Markle over the past few years. Lawsuits launched not just to win, but to punish. Interviews designed not to explain, but to wound. A constant reframing of events to cast themselves as persecuted saints, while anyone who disagrees is branded cruel, racist, or unethical. Now that strategy is colliding headfirst with the legal system, and the legal system does not care about feelings. It cares about evidence. And the evidence, at least at this stage, is deeply uncomfortable. The court has heard references to researchers acting aggressively, witnesses being berated, threats that failed, praise that failed, and finally, money being suggested as the solution. This is not the language of justice. It is the language of manipulation.
But that's all changed since Megxit. It's Prince Harry, who Leo cursed remarkably this year, actually went down in the public's estimations even further.
And suddenly, the question everyone is asking is this: if Harry's case is so strong, why did it need to be built like this? Why lean on convicted criminals? Why pressure witnesses? Why blur ethical lines so recklessly? The answer may be brutally simple. Without this scaffolding, the case collapses. And Harry knows it. That's why this moment is so dangerous for him. Once the spotlight turns inward, once scrutiny shifts from the Daily Mail to the machinery behind the claimants, the entire narrative flips. Harry is no longer the brave whistleblower. He becomes the entitled prince throwing millions at a vendetta, furious that the world won't bend to his version of reality. Here's the part his supporters don't want to hear. This case doesn't just risk losing in court, it risks destroying what little credibility he has left. If the public concludes that Harry is willing to collaborate with unethical actors, intimidate witnesses, and weaponize the justice system to settle personal scores, his moral lectures become meaningless. His speeches about compassion ring hollow. His warnings about abuse of power turn into bitter jokes. This is the cost of absolutism. When you convince yourself you are always right, anything becomes justifiable. Any tactic, any ally, any threat. And now, as courtroom revelations pile up, Harry is facing something he has tried desperately to avoid for years: accountability that cannot be spun away with an interview, a podcast, or a carefully worded statement from a source close to the Duke. Court documents do not care about branding, and judges do not care about victim narratives. They care about facts, and those facts are starting to look very inconvenient indeed. This was meant to be Harry's moment of triumph. Instead, it's turning into the moment the entire house of cards begins to shake. The real danger isn't whether he ultimately wins or loses the case, it's what happens along the way. Every day this drags on, more details leak, more contradictions surface, and more people start connecting dots Harry desperately hoped would never appear on the same page. This is no longer just about alleged phone hacking from decades ago. It's about credibility in the present. And credibility is the one thing Harry cannot afford to lose completely. Behind palace walls, there is said to be a grim sense of inevitability, resignation rather than shock or outrage. Those who have observed Harry for years describe the same cycle repeating over and over. A grievance is identified, lawyers are hired, advisors who say slow down are ignored, and anyone raising concerns about optics, evidence, or consequences is dismissed as unsupportive or disloyal. What's different this time is that the spotlight isn't on the press, it's on Harry's methods. Once the court starts questioning how witnesses were approached, how statements were shaped, and how much money was floating around behind the scenes, the moral framework of the case collapses. It stops being about whether newspapers behaved badly 20 years ago and starts being about whether Harry is behaving badly now. And that is not a comparison he wins. The language revealed in court filings is especially damaging, not because it proves wrongdoing outright, but because it shows intent, mindset, and a willingness to push boundaries. It reveals an escalation of pressure when cooperation isn't forthcoming, viewing witnesses not as independent truth-tellers, but as obstacles to be managed. That mentality mirrors what we've seen from Harry before, in his statements about the media, about his family, about critics. There is always a villain, always an enemy, always a justification for going further, harder, louder. In Harry's world, opposition doesn't exist in good faith, it exists to be crushed. And that is exactly why this case is spiraling. Courts are allergic to crusades. Judges do not reward emotional narratives or inherited trauma. They reward precision, restraint, and clean hands. The moment a claimant appears to be orchestrating outcomes rather than uncovering truth, sympathy evaporates. Sympathy is the one thing Harry has been trading on for years. What's especially striking is how unnecessary this all feels. Harry didn't need to lead this charge. He didn't need to be the face of it. He didn't need to surround himself with figures whose pasts are so toxic that their mere involvement taints everything they touch. But Harry has never resisted a fight that feels personal. This lawsuit isn't just about the Daily Mail. It's about control, about reasserting power over an institution he believes humiliated him, about proving once and for all that he is not weak, not silenced, not irrelevant. And that desperation is showing. Observers inside the legal world note quietly that this case has become bloated, overreaching, and stuffed with allegations that are difficult to prove, dependent on testimony from deeply compromised individuals. It is a strategy that looks impressive on paper, but crumbles under scrutiny. When you build a case on people who have admitted to lying, hacking, and breaking the law, you inherit their credibility problems, you do not erase them. Harry seems not to understand that. Instead, he appears to believe that his cause sanctifies everything it touches. Because he is fighting the press, anything done in service of that fight is automatically justified. Threats become pressure. Payments become support. Bullying becomes encouragement. But the court doesn't speak that language, and neither does the public. There was a time when Harry could do no wrong, when every action was filtered through grief, trauma, and lost innocence. When critics were shouted down as cruel or heartless. That era is over. The goodwill is gone. And what is replacing it is far more dangerous: skepticism. People are asking questions they never asked before. Why does Harry always end up in court? Why do so many of his legal battles rely on narrative rather than evidence? Why do so many of his allies turn out to be ethically compromised? And why does accountability only ever flow in one direction? These are not questions his team can PR their way out of. The more Harry insists he alone is fighting corruption, the more his own behavior is measured against the standards he claims to uphold. By that standard, this case looks increasingly indefensible. What's happening now is a slow erosion, not a single dramatic collapse, but a steady leaking away of trust. Every revelation chips at the image of Harry as a principled reformer and replaces it with something far less flattering: a man consumed by grievance, willing to burn credibility, alliances, and institutions to satisfy it.
While celebrity fortunes continue to rise and fall, the public response to Prince Harry and Meghan Markle has followed a strikingly steady course.
And there's another layer to this that Harry may not have fully considered. This case doesn't exist in a vacuum. It sits alongside everything else: the interviews, the book, the documentaries, the endless accusations against his family. When judges and observers assess his motives, they do not do so in isolation. They see a pattern: a man who repeatedly frames himself as a victim while exercising extraordinary privilege and power. That pattern matters. When someone with immense wealth, status, and influence claims persecution, courts look very closely at how that power is being used. The suggestion that witnesses were threatened or pressured, even indirectly, turns Harry's narrative on its head. Suddenly, he is not the one exposing abuse of power. He is being accused of enabling it. And that is why this moment is so explosive. It explains why Harry is reportedly furious, brittle, and increasingly isolated. Why former supporters are going quiet. Why even sympathetic commentators are hedging their language. They can feel the shift. The case that was supposed to cement Harry's legacy as a reformer may instead define him as something else entirely: a cautionary tale. This is what happens when personal vendettas are dressed up as moral crusades. When trauma is weaponized instead of processed. When the desire to win overwhelms the obligation to be fair. The tragedy, if there is one, is that Harry genuinely believes he is right. He believes his pain entitles him to rewrite the rules. He believes his cause excuses excess. And he believes that because the press has done wrong before, it must always be wrong now. But belief is not proof. And righteousness is not a legal strategy. As this case continues, the danger for Harry is not just losing, it is being exposed. Exposed as someone who talks endlessly about accountability but cannot tolerate it himself. Exposed as someone who condemns bullying while benefiting from it. Exposed as someone who claims to hate tabloid tactics while adopting their ugliest methods behind closed doors. If the court ultimately rules against him, it will sting. But if the court and the public decide that his methods are as unethical as those he condemns, that damage will be permanent. Once the mask slips, it does not go back on. Harry wanted a reckoning with the media. What he may be getting instead is a reckoning with himself.